It's not colored, it's like the face.
We're on.
Hi. Timing is everything. Hi, welcome to First Geek Congregation. We're again running a little late. Not as late as we were last week, but we're still trying to get that whole tech thing to work out every time. And probably we're actually going to move our start time from now on to about 2:10. And the reason why is actually in the order of service, which, that's kind of a joke actually around here. We actually do have from 2 o'clock to 10 o'clock is kind of, everybody just sits around and waits for people to show up.
2 o'clock to 10 o'clock.
2 o'clock to 2:10. Yes, 2 o'clock to 2:10 is basically open yammer. We all chat and say how the week's been going and things like that. So probably actually going to move it in the future just a little bit. And to tell you right up front, next week we are not going to be here. It's 4th of July weekend, so for everybody who's in the U.S., happy 4th of July. We're going to be out of town and enjoying ourselves and blowing things up.
You made the joke. Everybody has a 4th of July. It happens to be Independence Day in America.
You're correct. Yes. Everybody, happy 4th of July. Those in America, happy Independence Day. If you hadn't guessed, that was my wife, who gives me a lot of grief every time I'm wrong.
Wait, should
Note that he recorded out live that he said he was wrong.
I didn't say that. Anyways. Hi, welcome to First Geek Congregation. Like I said, we won't be here next week. The week after, we will be back, so no worries there. If you're wondering, if you're seeing this for the first time, what is First Geek Congregation? Well, we're a bunch of geeks. We really like religion. We discuss Christianity very specifically. We're vaguely a Christian organization. However, we do discuss other religions. We bring in speakers from other walks of life and other concepts. We're not so focused on just what we do. We believe in the concepts of peace, love, and respect. And the easiest way to peace, love, and respect, it's easy to dislike something that you don't know about. So sometimes we talk about things we bring people in and talk about things we don't know about so that we can more easily show peace, love, and respect to those people. You can catch us on Facebook at facebook.com/First Geek Congregation, or you can catch us at firstgeekcongregation.com, or on Twitter at the way about.
You can't see the vision. There you go.
firstgeekcongregation.com, or you can catch us on Twitter at firstgeekcong, C-O-N-G, because you can't fit congregation on Twitter. And the nice part about those things, or you can catch us on the Google Hangout when we're actually doing the live events. The cool part about that is through any of those channels, even though you're sitting and watching this, if you're watching it as a live event, you can actually message us and we'll respond to it. We'll answer your questions or your thoughts or etc. You are part of the conversation also, not just the people in the room here. And that's kind of one of the geekier sides, because let's face it, there's a whole lot of geeks that are introverted and don't like to get out anyways. So, but now that we got that out of the way, today's topic, it's been a rough week. It's been a rough week. I'll be honest. I've been to 2 funerals. There's been 2 deaths and 2 funerals this week. One of them of somebody who's part of my extended family, my best friend's brother, and another one who is somebody I knew that she was about 15 and then married into my family, and she passed away. And when you get into situations like that, it gets you fairly morbid thinking. You know, you start thinking about what is there really out there, what really happens. So today is about death, and death in the Bible, death in religion, death in atheism, even a little bit of everything. It's a morbid topic, I understand, but it's actually kind of interesting and fascinating how all of these cultures, and trust me, I'm not going to be able to go through all of them, the number of different belief systems for what happens when you die, what happens after death. There's this huge, wide range. So, and please ask questions and stop me anywhere along the lines. We'll start with what should theoretically be the easiest one, atheism. Atheist. If you don't believe in God, then obviously when you die, nothing happens, right? throw in the dirt, throw some dirt on top, and away you go. It's actually not true with atheism. That's true with the majority of atheism, and this is something that throughout this whole conversation is true of all the religions. There's the major tenet. There's what most people believe in a given group, and then there's what some people believe in a given group. Take for instance Dan Stahl. He wrote a book called there it is. The Atheist Afterlife. The odds of an afterlife reasonable. The odds of meeting God there. No. The idea being that there are those who don't believe in God, but do believe in the idea of an afterlife, that there's something beyond, that there's something happens. His is actually kind of goes along the lines of comparing human consciousness to conservation of energy. Basically, you could call it conservation of consciousness. When you die, it has to go somewhere. There's a requirement that something has to happen with it. Now, he doesn't actually make a whole lot of speculation of what. But that somewhere it continues to exist. So even though somebody suggests,
Plato had the idea that the soul came out and lived in a human and then went back to the grand pool, and so that's why, as a collective, we would learn generation over generation.
Yeah, that's a Gnostic. I always get this word because I never pronounce it. A Gnostic view. And there was actually a Christian Gnostic view like that at one time. It was the salvation of the wisdom and the soul, and those that were, I'm not sure how to put this, those that were seekers of knowledge, their souls were guaranteed to survive. However, Gnostic Christian, that was back then. Now that's a completely different definition. So, yeah. By the way, if you watched last week's on simulation argument also can be taken either way too, which is that nothing happens after death, or after death you're stuck in a saved state, or in a variable state, or any number of things. So none of these are absolutes on any of what I'm going to say. And don't take me as being the absolute authority on this either. I'm pulling a lot of this from a lot of different sources. Hindus tend to take the reincarnation cycle idea. Hindu and Buddhist both, which is you die, you come back, you die, just kind of keep repeating the cycle over and over. But that you keep part of your core. Your soul continues to move on to the next one. How you died and what was happening when you died determines how you come back.
I thought it was how you lived, right?
Well, it's interesting you say that. A Buddhist view is how you lived. A Hindu view is how you died. But how your overall life does affect it. So typically with them, when somebody's on their deathbed, with Hindu, you're supposed to surround them with family. You're supposed to surround them with peace, love, and kindness, and these things. So that when they come back, they're going to come back with that experience. Now, this is a simplified view because what you come back as, there's a whole lot of writings on that. I don't understand. I'll be honest. I have no idea why some people supposedly come back as another human and some people come back as a butterfly. There's
How do you feel about butterflies?
Well, I would gotta admit it. We can have a peaceful life.
Fly around, smell flowers all day, make some songs, and then go home.
Yeah, fair enough.
No complications.
Well, there's something to be said for that. You're right.
No social drama.
That we know of.
That we know of. I'm going to say, I don't know if you've ever seen, but butterflies do go at it sometimes.
But are they competing for like a flower, or are they like, you said my wing wasn't pretty?
Well, we have no way of knowing that. I'm assuming they don't have language, but
No, they do have language. They can tell each other where the different, just like bees can tell you where the good flowers are. They have
I stand
language,
corrected.
communication abilities, but that doesn't mean that you're going to get all dramatic over whether or not you have the right kind of colors on your wing.
Because you should be theoretically a reproductive association.
Right.
rather than-
But maybe they do, maybe they don't. I don't know.
No.
And of course, there's also usefulness in society.
Yes.
Because there was, I can't remember, somebody's diatribe on coming back from dung beetle. But at least you're doing more than you were in the first one.
That's an interesting point. The other thing that goes along with the Hindu thought, not necessarily so much in modern days as it used to be, which was the idea that if you were doing anything to prolong life, that was essentially against the concept of rebirth, because you're holding on to these things so that when you pass on, you're going to have passed on holding on to gold or holding on to these things that you couldn't take with you anyways. It goes against the idea of a peaceful, loving death. Buddhism is actually fairly similar. Again, with the reincarnation, and I'm going to say that this is a generalization. Saying Buddhism is similar is like saying Christianity all believes one thing too, because Hindi and Buddhism both are such large religions that they're broken down into different groups. So there are some that will believe a bit differently than others. Oh, the other thing is that some of these groups, it also matters. Life after death matters in the respect that how do you dispose of the body? Hindus, for instance, you can just cremate it. It's unimportant. It's a husk. It's gone. But there are some religions that it's very important how the body is disposed of. We'll get into Judaism and their beliefs here in a bit. Islam tends to go with the actually similar to the Christian view of death, judgment, going and spending your time with God. It's really not that much different. For them, when it comes to body disposal, you wash the body, you check it in the ground, you put it in a shroud, and you check it in the ground within about 24 hours.
Chuck, really?
Yes. Again, they're unimportant. Yeah, I say that as if the body's unimportant, and that's the point for a lot of these societies. Christianity makes huge importance on the body.
Right. Well, I besides being slightly insensitive, to make a point. Does it have to be wrapped in a shroud? Does it have to be washed first? Does it have to be buried, or can it be entombed in another way?
Has to be, well, for part of Islam, has to be washed, has to be enshrouded, has to be buried. Entombing was reserved for special situations, but I think that was only, and I don't know for certain, but I think that was only certain sects.
I was just going to say, because there's some places out in the Middle East I would not want to try to dig.
I agree with you, but part of their point with the washing and the shrouding, very similar to the Jewish concept, no embalming. You don't want to take the fluids out of the body and remove part of the body, even though the body itself is of no importance. So what?
Or pump it full of chemicals, etc.
Yeah. And they also, when somebody's getting close to death, kind of similar to the Hindu idea. The Hindus, they surround them with friends and family, and they want them to die a peaceful death. With the Islamic set is you bring family in, you read the Quran, you surround yourself with God's love, is what they're, or however you want to say it, God's love, Allah's love, during the death process, because you're trying to cleanse and bring peace to the body and the soul.
I'm going to pause you because you've mentioned on the deathbed. What about the unfortunate accidents? Get hit by a car. There is no deathbed cuddling.
Absolutely, and you're right. And for a lot of religions, there's kind of that sucked. It's not that it's precluding you from going to a better beyond or from a better rebirth or any of those things, but it does affect. For those that do the reincarnation things, a lot of times it does affect the reincarnation. For Islam, I don't know what it's tradition, but it does not necessarily mean that it has to happen that way. I do not know that there is like something that is going to occur. Hey, you didn't recite the Quran before you died, therefore, sorry, you're not getting in. As far as I know, that's a tradition. So what?
So that would suck.
Yeah, yeah, it would.
You live your life, well, your entire, you do the best you can, and you're hit by a car, and it's just.
Wow, because that
I-
arm's
I
missing, I
don't-
can't take you.
I
We'll
don't. I
get
don't.
into the history of Catholicism. in a minute.
I don't. Personally, I can't believe it, but I mean, I know there's others that do or think.
And there's there is a number of religions, particularly Christianity, has a thing about the wholeness of the body. Judaism, Christianity both have passages about the wholeness of the body and making sure that it comes back together. But we'll get into those in a bit. But I don't know of any of them that are basically, hey, you got hit by a car. That is such bad luck. We can't let you in because you didn't recite your prayers before you died, and you didn't have your family around. I didn't in my readings. I did not run across anybody who's specifically that way.
To offer a bit of a counterpoint, a lot of religions put a lot of weight on how you die, not what you leave behind. I can imagine if you're sitting there and you are reading your scripture, whatever scripture it may be, with Granny while she's passing, it's therapeutic for you as a survivor as much as it is for Granny. So should she be hit by a bus, you're just as shocked as anybody else, so your mourning process is altered.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I've been in both situations of complete absolute suddenness and then having the pleasure of sitting there for 2 days. So it's how you deal with the concept of loss has a lot more I feel has a lot more to do with the survivors than it does with the dying person.
Oh, and I'm not going to disagree. In fact, the whole process in all of these religions of if you look at it from a psychological and sociological standpoint, for them, 90% of the process is for the people who are around the dying person, not for the dying person. Only 10% of that comfort is for the dying person. It is to make us feel better about the idea that, hey, they're passing on, and I'm helping them by reading the Quran. I'm helping them by reading them scripture. I'm helping them by talking soothing, calm things and sharing stories. We feel that we're part of the process, and we're helping them out, and we're helping ourselves. We feel better about ourselves. Because the worst thing that humans have is to feel powerless about something. We don't feel like we have any control whatsoever. It drives us nuts.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Okay, I have a hard time. Zoroaster. I have a hard time.
Can you write it on the board for us?
That. Close. Start again. Oh, I got one thing wrong. Okay, if you're wondering, have you ever heard of Zoroaster?
Any of them. Zoroastrianism.
You ever heard of Zoroastrianism? Is usually what I hear it referred to as. It is a really, really old religion, as old as Judaism and a lot of the ones from the time period. And I mention it because it's kind of cool. There still is a surviving component of it to this day. Not much. It's a Middle Eastern religion that you don't hear much, but they find a lot of archaeological finds for it and things like that. The fun part is, Christianity is not the only religion with the whole idea of heaven and hell and a balance between the two of them, et cetera, et cetera. With these guys, in particular, when you died, you went up, you were judged. And there was a very specific and very specific. It was a 3-day process. You went up, you were judged, you faced the sword. The sword stood in this bridge that you had to cross, which of course crossing the bridge sounds a little more Viking. Crossing the bridge, and if you had done evil and horrible things in your life, then you were actually beheaded and cast down. If you did good things, you were allowed to cross the bridge. And you added to the count for whether the good guy's side or the bad guy's side. And later on, there was going to be an apocalypse that comes along and both sides go at it. So I thought it was, even though there's not practice a whole lot anymore, it was interesting because there's a lot of parallels with some of the writings of Christianity, the idea of heaven and hell being at war and things like that. These guys had exactly the same thing too, but they had a very different view of it. In Christianity, God's in control. That's just the end of it. There is no hell raises up and overthrows God. It's just not going to happen in Christianity. For these guys, their belief was every component of society, everybody in society contributed to one side or the other. And in the end, if the scales were unbalanced, that's which side was going to win. So if you had an evil society, hell would raise up and win. If you had a good society, heaven would come down and take over earth. Judaism, because Judaism is fun. Judaism is fun. I'm going to talk about 2 branches of Judaism, because everybody heard of the Pharisees and Sadducees? The Pharisees, there's the big major difference between the Pharisees and the Sadducees is what they believed in. The Pharisees believed in the idea of what became oral tradition. The works beyond the books of Moses. The Sadducees were very literalist. They only believed in the 5 books of Moses, the Song of Moses, or et cetera, et cetera. Nothing beyond that. Because of that, Sadducees had no belief in the hereafter. As far as they were concerned, when you died, you were done. That was it. That was toast. The Pharisees, on the other hand, they had tales beyond that. Particularly,
So Sadducees didn't do anything with the prophets?
Oddly enough, they did and they didn't. But for the most part, for the overall part, they did not care. Their concern was Torah.
So the entire concept of Isaiah and everything got completely just lost.
Which would explain why they had such a problem with Jesus. You don't have Isaiah and a couple of those.
The Messiah doesn't matter to you.
Exactly.
No wonder they're nuts. Sorry.
Well, I liked the way that Jesus actually answered them by using the books that they acknowledged and going, hey, this is present tense. They're alive to God.
He did quote other books beyond the Torah, but he specifically pulled in the Torah. Said, yes, this is what this means. This is the answer to that. So yeah, it is kind of fun how all answers were done in the Word of God.
What would you expect?
Well, he went using their rules.
Oh, but if the Messiah is incarnate God, why would he use, but the frog croaks at midnight? That wouldn't make any sense. It would have to be God's words.
Yeah.
I can't say that it's surprising. It's just, what other answer would he give?
Well, it's true, but a lot of the answers he gave the people were based on parables that he essentially created on the fly. The mustard seed.
Yes and no.
There was basis in.
Yeah, the concept had been reiterated. Just like you can talk about a math problem. Why is 2 + 2 4? And you can explain it to a child 3 different ways. That doesn't make it any more or less right.
Yeah.
So reiterating some of the stories, like to tell the parable son. If there wasn't the story of Joseph, then it wouldn't have made as much sense to the people. It wasn't like that was the first time they ever heard such a thing.
Yeah, I agree.
So they're just telling the story in a different way.
Well, I've always wondered when it comes to Sadducees, there was a time period where Torah was verboten. And I was curious. I've never researched it. I've always wondered how the Sadducees, did they come about after that time period, or did they survive during that time period? And if so, if they couldn't have access to Torah, what did they survive off of? Was it just oral recanting?
One people don't even talk to the other Jews. I can't remember the name. Who was Eve?
E.M.
No. S or S-H. I can't remember it in Hebrew or English.
No.
Anyway.
Off the top of my head, I'm not.
They decided to live in the mountains and they had nothing to do with anybody else, so they don't even like the current Jews. They're purists, back whatever.
I think I do know who you're talking about. I'm trying to remember the name. Yeah, I don't remember.
Anyway.
So
continue.
there was the Sadducees, which was basically, theirs was all the focus on the now. And God's retribution, God's blessings were all about today. There was nothing beyond your life. There was no blessings beyond that. Because oddly enough, based on Torah, there's not much in the way of, and we'll get into that in a minute, there's not much in the way of discussion of afterlife in Torah.
Enoch walked with God.
That is an exception. Like I said, there's not much. There's not much.
He was doing something cool enough that he got to walk with God and he did not die.
Judaism, by the way, Orthodox Judaism and Judaism as a whole doesn't have a standard belief set when it comes to the afterlife anyways. You die and something happens. You don't know what. Reincarnation is a possibility. Staying in the ground and then being done and over with is a possibility. There's the theory that good souls do go to heaven. Bad souls simply cease to exist. There's also the idea of Sheol, which
It's unpleasant.
Sheol has the word. The word is really interesting because it means pit or underlie.
Yeah, but it isn't always described as hot either. It's just unpleasant.
There was a space that was described as hot. It was the burning flames off the back, a section, the valley of
Right.
starts with the G.
That's not in Old Testament.
Yeah, no.
Is it?
It's in Old
Oh, sure,
Testament.
because Ezekiel
It's not
talks
Torah.
about it. Yeah, Ezekiel talks about it.
Yeah.
Because that's where he found where he fell after it.
What did you say?
Gehenna.
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 Yes.
Gehenna, and then because you bad English, and you say it turned into Armageddon. No, a little because it's Ha, Megana.
Yeah.
And so then you add a couple centuries of bad English on the Hebrew, and it comes out to the Armageddon.
Jesus out of Yeshua. Or
Yeah.
Yeshua?
Yeshua or Yeshua, I've heard it.
Right, which is actually
Jesus.
Joshua, which the direct translation is Joshua instead of Jesus. It took quite a few steps, cultural steps and linguistic steps, before it ended up with Jesus.
Well, then even getting
We
Joshua.
often get names redone through different translations and things, and then we end up with totally different words, so we don't understand what it was supposed to be.
Oh yeah.
Well, even like my name is Kat. I get called Kate often, and so if it just perpetuated that way, I'd end up being called Catalina by the time I was 40. But I don't like being called Kate, so it just switched. But just little things like that evolve over time. In short time, so in long time, linguistics is fun and fascinating anyway. That I will not waste your time. But
I didn't put my Hebrew on there. Oh, there it is. Let's just go with this. Give me just a second. That was the worst shin ever. I'm just going to go back. My Hebrew writing is too horrible. Would you like?
You're gonna reach over.
Curse you, gravity.
Hi, people. I don't like cameras. Got my history.
You're okay at the moment.
Sure. I wasn't even going to bother with vowels. But
Well, that's not a vowel, that's a shin.
Oh.
Oh, like different. It doesn't show up right. I'm typing. It's just as a line with something off.
Now, I write this down for a reason, or had her write it down for a reason. This is a really old word. This is an Old Testament word. This is out of Genesis. This word, Hebrew, is very, very simple. It's actually a fairly simplistic language when you're dealing with Genesis. Her comment about, hey, you end up turning the word into Armageddon when it comes to Gehenna, because it starts with or ha. I mean, ha being the, because the valley of.
Sounds like Pinal or something like that.
Yes, that is correct, actually. Thank you, because I forgot to write that down. This word, though, is translated as pit, grave, or underworld. So
Where you throw the garbage.
Say what?
Where you throw the garbage.
It could be anything. It could be anything. In fact, there's a passage that does appear in Genesis that mentions the pit, as in he is going down to the pit. It is. Oh man, Joseph. Anyways, and I'll get to that in a bit. But so sometimes reading these things and what scholars write about them and things like that gets a bit weird because the translation could be any number of things. It's potentially contextual, or for all we know, all of them just mean a pit in the ground. It could be all it means. But there was supporting evidence, because the term is also used, another term is used later, Rephaim. The giants are also the term same used.
Rephaim for the giants?
Yes. So to write it.
Nephilim.
It's not the only word for
Okay. I'm willing to learn. Doesn't mean I think you're crazy.
them. Here, give me a second.
Genesis.
Yes, yes. This comes from the Jewish Virtual Library. So I'm just going to pull it from this source. I'm going to pretend like it's an authoritative source. I cannot say that it's authoritative.
Mm-hmm.
So what?
What?
Jewish Virtual Library.
Biased, but accurate.
Fair enough.
I've looked at it before.
And I am pronouncing it wrong. I said Rephaim. It's Rephaim. Rephaim. This is the problem with playing with the Bible and reading the Bible. Sometimes you can get caught up in debates over just one word's translation or meaning. In the Bible, two uses of the term are discernible. The first is a gentilic, Genesis 14:5, referring to people distinguished by their enormous stature. Especially singled out are Og, king of Bashan, and the powerful adversaries of David's heroes. 2 Samuel 21:16. The Bible authors trace their designation to an apparent human. I can't say the word. Eponym.
Eponym.
Thank you. I can't pronounce it.
Eponym, like pseudonym, like antonym.
Anyways, the Bible's emphasis on the size and might of the Rephaim is responsible for the Septuagint's renderings, giants and titans, as well as for, and there's a number of other words that for various languages. The second use is shades or spirits. And Isaiah and Psalms is where that shows up, but it's obviously post-Torah. The shades and spirits, I mention it because while Sheol could just mean pit, later on in the Bible it's also used to definitely, most certainly mean an underworld, because this is where those shades, which are your ancestors, those who have died before you, are taken down into the underworld, and this is where they live. That was a really long explanation to get to that one sentence.
Yeah, right there, 14:5, right, living large in front of me. Well, I've only read it a couple hundred times. I couldn't imagine why I miss it.
I'm sorry, how many times did we find new things every time we go through it?
I know.
So, especially when you put some other accessory with it that triggers a new word, and you're like, no, what that word doesn't mean?
Especially because it's in a list of names talking about people, and I'm like, maybe it did just mean Bob. I don't know.
Yeah. Bob. That's Bob over there. He's 13 feet tall. That's Bob. All right, I have lost. So what?
That's enough for me. These guys aren't that.
Og's bed was 13 feet long.
Right. Our bed is much longer than we are tall.
Yeah. So I mean,
Saying.
you're right. Og might have been 6 foot and just have a very large bed. 6
Depending
foot to a
on-
little Jewish guy.
Depending on who was sleeping in it.
Wow, what was my point? There was a point behind that. I think I got this. didn't I?
Sheol and the concept of
That was
and
an
Torah.
Old Testament idea there, or Old Testament idea, not necessarily Torah idea, that a number of the Jewish went off of for a long time, which was the idea of the underworld. You died, you went to the underworld. It was also valid the idea that you died and you came back. It was also valid the idea that you died and you went somewhere. And then there was those who believed that you died and you didn't go anywhere. The Jews had this huge spectrum because they didn't have what they felt was in Torah and in the Old Testament, in the prophets, that there was an absolute on what was going to happen. So they never got to the point of everybody agrees on, hey, your soul goes to heaven. They didn't get to that.
And then there was the concept of the non-bed, because Enoch walked with God and Elijah was taken away by chariots of fire. In
Yeah.
a positive manner. So, what about those who didn't die?
Yeah, it's a very valid question.
So they went somewhere, I want to presume, not to the pit.
Well, and if you buy into the book of Enoch, which gives you a description, then Enoch passed on.
I was going with just what's in the Torah.
Yeah.
And the prophets.
Well, what I was saying is, if you buy into the first book of Enoch, it goes in and it says, okay, yes, absolutely, he went to heaven. He went and he visited up there, and that's where he stayed. But that's, of course, non-biblical canon or non-canon. So.
Yeah. Well, I just and what was one of the other interesting? I don't want to interrupt your points because I didn't read your points today. What's your next point?
Next one's when we play with the fun one, Christianity.
Oh, I'm not done with Judaism.
Oh wow!
You went into length with the other
Sure.
religions about the death process.
Oh, you're right. I did skip that. Go for it.
In
You're still part of
Judaism, they have and always have had, as far as I can tell from Scripture, the dead is unclean. Starting with, I'm really bad at chapter and verse. Anyway, there's several stories about that, and then on to Leviticus about the rules of who can and cannot touch a dead body, even to clean it and remove it from the tent. And then it gets into more specifically when Aaron's first 2 sons decided to be dumb and got eviscerated in the tabernacle. It was quite the point that fire was not approved manner of death. That was the bad part. So therefore, they never did any cremation, or even like a lot of the Native Americans burned, or the Greeks had pyres and stuff like that. Completely, I wouldn't say forbidden, but not okay. That was not the appropriate way to get rid of the body. But then again, yeah, if you've ever been to the Middle East, go ahead, try to dig a hole. So there was what to do with what was left, and what did it need to be considered holy, which is why then moving on, talking about historical places, but from the New Testament, when they talk about the whitewashed tombs and stuff like that, they had tombs, they had caves that were covered over outside of the city of Jerusalem, because you couldn't dig a hole, but you had to make sure they were gotten rid of. And even now and currently, a lot of Jews go for direct burial. You may or may not have a shroud, you may or may not have a pine box, and you are buried that way. There's no embalming, there is no viewing. Do not bring the dead body into the temple. Very specifically.
In fact, that's what the don't bring the dead body into the temple is mostly biblical, in the fact that the body is unclean.
Right.
So.
And even now they sell, it's a bookcase, and then you take the shelves out, and it's a coffin. So you can plan ahead so your son doesn't have to deal with it later. I wish I was making it up.
I do not want my coffin on the wall filled with my Star Trek books for 20 years.
Staring at you in the face.
Yeah.
Everybody's going to go. Why do I have to figure it out after you die? Well, leave that burden to me.
You're going to burden me, I know that, so,
So you'll just die in that state.
So what?
You can just die in that state, then the kids are finally to bury you. So they have a very specific and much more of a memorial service than anything. Occasionally the family would have graveside, but not. That's why you don't ever see anything about Jewish funeral homes. They don't do that. To a point, even things like autopsy and stuff are considered an abomination. So usually a rabbi has to either sign off on it or bear witness. Or
depending on which group.
Right.
Yeah. Again, with that whole thing.
Right.
It's not the
Define
absolute
kosher
for all groups.
Okay. Yeah. Define kosher and just mark that.
Kosher is whatever your mother said it was.
That doesn't work for me.
Oh, see, you got an easy definition then.
As if I would. Anyway, so there's the whole thing about, and then some modern sects go for the Day of Remembrance. The word is the year after yard site. It's Yiddish word. The anniversary of the person's death. And you still remember them, particularly if it was somebody close to you, like your mother or whatever. And you put rocks on their tombstones rather than flowers and stuff like that. It's a thing. And there's a whole process for mourning that's kind of just legalistic, but some of it's like sitting Shiva. You don't do any work for 7 days, and you have people come bring you food, and you walk around your house without shoes on.
And cover all the mirrors.
You know, when my sister passed, I wish I could have slept there for 7 days and had somebody else bring me food. You know, it's not necessarily a bad idea, but there's a lot more rigors, of course, than just that. But just the entire concept that the body, the tent, is gone. so you get rid of it as quickly as possible, so you don't spread disease or uncleanliness. And even the Aaronic priests weren't supposed to touch any dead body, regardless of whether it was their wife or child or mom or anything. So, is that all?
I don't know. You were talking. Is it?
You're the one who read. I'm pulling it off my
Go ahead and say it.
my church thing.
Very, very good. Now comes the fun one. Christianity. Because we've already covered, we've covered Torah, what Torah says about death, which is really, or about afterlife, which is really not very much. Now then, can anybody tell me what happens in Christianity when you die?
Protestantism or Catholicism or yes or
Anybody pick one and start.
I don't really know. I want to be stuffed.
You want to be what?
Stuffed.
Stuffed and mounted on the wall?
No, a seated position with my hands so I can hold a book, and then you can just swap a relevant book so I remain topical.
That's kind of fun.
That's just a want. It's not.
Your wife
It's not
just
going to
went-
happen.
By the way, your wife just hung her head on that one.
There's a story book I read. It's probably a 100-year-old story in school in literature class about that's what she had done because she stuffed her dog too. I mean, it was.
Yeah. Just keep the cats off me. Give me a book. Turn the page every few days.
I don't know about keeping the cats off. It would be a little difficult.
Yeah.
Just can't keep them off too much.
Sorry.
There's no wrong answer.
I mean, as far as when I was reading the Bible, I didn't see anything. I mean, obviously they did the whole wrapping him in shrouds sort of thing, and they had herbs and stuff. And they put him in a cave and rolled a stone in front of it and all of that.
And he just popped up later. 3 days later, he comes back.
Yeah.
Pretty much covered it.
And they thought somebody had moved him or something. You know, like, where did they put him?
And off of that, the tradition of them coming later to anoint the body was following with some of the other traditional Jewish things. But they couldn't come. They had to wait the second day because of the Sabbath. So yeah, it was quite the thing, and I'm sure they were quite terrified that there was no body there. So, but all that, understanding how Jewish burial went makes a lot more sense to study the crucifixion and then raising.
But I didn't see anything that, I mean, I know that from pop culture I've seen, people do the whole graveside thing and stuff, but I didn't see anything biblically that supports this or that method, because God can raise anything. I mean, he can take broken bones and put them together and, make life from a stone and all of that. So I got nothing.
And that's the thing about it. You're absolutely right, because it isn't a process. There's no prescribed in the Bible process for dealing with the dead in the New Testament. The Old Testament does have a couple of rules about the dead. Somebody dies in their house, what you're supposed to do. If somebody dies and you touch their body, what you're supposed to do. There's never rules in Leviticus for that. But beyond that, what you're supposed to do with the body, not really covered. There's nothing about a burial that's actually specifically. The Jews believed cremation was a bad idea because you needed to have the whole body. And if you could, bury the whole body in the same place. Modern day, as you mentioned, don't embalm it, get it done and over with very quickly. Christianity is much more liberal with it, but anything goes, really.
Well, and then of course, brief history of Catholicism. They didn't believe in burning, because ancient world and Mediterranean, a lot of the Greeks and other cultures like that would have pyres, because what else are you supposed to do with it? They didn't believe in burning. As we move on into the Middle Ages, right before the Renaissance and the Reformation of Protestantism, there was a great thing with the whole, oh, well, you don't know if Grammy made it? Well, if you give me, £1,000 sterling, then we can make sure that Grammy made it into heaven. And a lot of other things like that. And of course, Catholicism with the emphasis on Mother Mary, what she can do for you to help make sure that your beloved one made it into heaven. She was greatly used as an intercessor. And of course, even now, some sects of Catholicism believe that you can pray somebody into heaven, that their salvation is not necessarily their own. You end up with some of them believe that when you light the candle before the saint, that you're helping to motivate them to pray your beloved into heaven, or the fact that you could pray hard enough for somebody else's salvation, that it would make the difference, because they thoroughly believed in the hellfire and brimstone. Heaven is, you get to hang out with the saints and the fluffy clouds, etc. And then the opposite is hellfire and brimstone. You will suffer eternal torment. So you very much want to go to heaven at almost any cost. And if you were ill or otherwise know that you're going to die, paying off the priest to make sure that you made it, your own self, was definitely something that was practiced. And even just as a standard pardoner for sin, that it was a job in the church to be a pardoner. It had nothing to do with confession. That either they beat you for your sin so you felt better about it, or you paid them off or whatever. It was very corrupt according to biblical practice, which is then the concept of the Reformation, and Protestantism bringing in a lot of things that were not about that. To go back again, you had to be baptized on your deathbed. His name was Constantine, was baptized on his deathbed because that's what you did. You needed to make, that was the washing before you moved on to the next place. Whereas that somehow that moved forward to you had to baptize the babies because they were already covered in sin because sex is wrong. And then you move into the concept of Anabaptists, then towards the Reformation, where that is your outward reflection of your receiving of Christ, which is very strangely much more like Judaism. The concept of immersion and washing oneself outwardly as well as inwardly to become spiritually clean is all over the Torah, and wash yourself in water. It's repeated ad nauseum even, because it wasn't just a hygienic thing. You are now clean. You have changed your clothes and you have washed in water, and you are a new person. So therefore, the baptizing was always going on before John the Baptist was doing his part either. And then they get into the whole, it used to be that Catholics did not embalm, you had to have the last rites, you had to have a funeral mass, and you had to be buried in the ground, or a dead place tomb, like New Orleans. Obviously the ground doesn't work out so well. And up now, through recent times, different sects, they go for cremation. And you don't necessarily have to be buried. You can be in an urn on your kid's altar or kid's mantle forever. And you don't necessarily, you can be embalmed then if you want to be. The funeral mass is still fairly important, but you may not have last rites and still get into heaven, depending on, because especially like we were talking earlier with sudden deaths. I mean, there's one thing to sit there and be sick in the hospital for 2 weeks, and so you have time for last rites, and there's another thing to get hit by a drunk driver and you run up to work. You can still get into heaven without having last rites. They pretty much got away with the indulgences payment, depending on how you interpret that. I think they take care of that more with marriage than they do death anymore, but But yeah, and definitely to be buried in the ground is still a thing. Not necessarily a requirement, but they'd more encourage that, even if it leaves ashes. Yeah, brief history of Catholicism.
By the way, one of the other, in case you didn't mention it, since I wasn't here for the whole thing. One of the other reasons why certain versions of Christianity would not allow for cremation at one point was because of the funeral pyres that pagan religions and other religions were doing.
Pagan.
So yeah, it was, you can't do that because those guys do that. It was very important to a lot of groups at one time. Not so important anymore, especially because the way we deal with the body in modern time is a lot different anyways. Surprisingly, the funeral pyres was one of the better answers from a health and wellness standpoint than was chucking it in the ground.
Right. Well, and then even now people complain about why you can't get shot out of a cannon or sprinkle your ashes anywhere. It's contamination. There's some sparkly ashes. There's nothing to contaminate.
There's nothing left. Well, a number of the sports fields have problems with people sneaking in so-and-so's ashes and dumping it. Disney has a whole protocol for this because it happens so frequently. If they think you're doing it, you're in a lot of trouble. And you're going to pay for it.
And there's other ways. Like, I know somebody who I will not name who took her husband's ashes, and the city or county said she couldn't dump them into the river in which had been so much a part of his life for farming and everything else. So they couldn't do it, and so she just went out at midnight and did it. Who's gonna know? I mean, especially dumping it in some place like that.
It's not like you're taking a whole body and you're gonna float Bob down the river and just maybe
Bob
throw him
really high.
Bob. Anyways, I can understand their objection to one way of doing it, but come on.
It's about 6 pounds of sparkly ashes. There's no.
Was this fire part of the purification in biblical writings? Like, there was, a whole bunch of writings about how he was going to purify them with fire, or as if it was in a crucible, or.
Yes, but. And even Isaiah, to be touched with coal, to be able to speak. There is a purification part, and like I said, this is something that is inferred from Scripture. When Aaron's sons had came in and then were eviscerated for being uncool, it was inferred that fire was not an acceptable way for the human body to be disposed of. A lot of it is inference that we humankind are the likeness of God. Not the cow, not the sheep, not the stuff that we eat, not animals, but specifically humankind. So that would be kind of an uncool representation that we could burn God. Complete inference. The same reason as that's one of the reasons that cannibalism is specifically taken off the list, whereas you can eat cow but not human. There's enough. It's still meat and blood. And I'm sorry, if you look in the face of the baby calf, they have a soul. I'm gonna
bring her point real quick.
Sure.
Real quick, because she mentioned this. I had to Google it because I couldn't remember exactly where it was at. Zechariah is where it's at. Very specifically on your purification fire. There's more than one reference, but this is one of the earliest references of it. Zechariah 13, I'm going to start at 7, just a couple of sentences in. Awake, O sword, against my shepherd, and against the man that is my fellow, and saith the Lord of hosts, smite the shepherd, and the sheep shall be scattered, and I will turn my hand upon the little ones. And it shall come to pass that in all the land, said the Lord, 2 parts shall be cut off and die, but the third shall be left therein. And I will bring the third part through the fire. I will refine them as silver is refined. I will try to make them as gold is tried. I shall call upon they shall call upon my name, and I will hear them. I will say, it is my people, and they shall, the Lord is my God. There's your purification fire. And it's actually repeated in a couple other places also. Zechariah 13. The actual sentence was Zechariah 9. I went back a little bit.
Well, I'm just going to look it up in Hebrew, not to argue with you, to prove. Because I ran into many translation opportunities, and there's too many different words for too many different things over time.
But there is, and actually,
so I'm going to see if it is Aish.
Yeah, I'm going to say this. That was the King James version. Pull up the NET.
It's Aish, which means fire.
Yeah.
So that's that.
Boom.
There's a couple of them. There's a couple of references. There's not a whole lot of them when you get into Revelation. There's all sorts of fire.
Yeah.
But
even Old Testament, because like I said, Isaiah, I cannot talk.
Yeah.
And then was touched with the coal from the holy altar, and he could speak. He had a clean mouth.
Yeah.
I don't know if any of you ever sterilized anything with fire, but it's effective.
Painful if it's on you.
Well, I was referring to an implement.
Yes.
What are you going to sterilize on your body with fire? Right, an implement.
No time for a shower.
Did you just hand me the blowtorch? Those pins are a little smelly. Anyways.
That's not creme brulee at all.
Oh.
Sorry, it came out.
No, it's fine, especially since he likes creme brulee.
And there's a lot of
Not
you know
anymore.
I'm gonna kindle a fire in the world, and I wish it was set now. And
Well, and they do speak
There's a lot
of the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, as being a fire. So you're right. It is kind of a
double bag.
yeah. You end up with two different definitions of its own antonym. Because yeah, the concept of refiner's fire and what is it? There's it's somewhere in scripture, with the spirit falling afresh on you, and even in Acts,
Tons of fire.
yeah, was very specifically like tongues of fire. There's Greek or English or Hebrew, it's the same phrase. There's no other descriptor for it.
By the way, I'm gonna continue to go back to the crucible again. Your fire and your crucible, because I quoted Zechariah, and now I'm kind of scrolling through and going, well, apparently if I would have looked a little further, it goes back one more step, which Isaiah 48, which is, behold, I have refined you, but not as silver. I have tried you in the furnace of affliction. And then, if you want to go the other direction with it and go New Testament with it, just had it a minute ago. Proverbs also going for a little bit. The crucible is for silver, and the furnace is for gold, and the Lord tests hearts. So that fire and crucible, yes, actually, that's a thread that was a little bit larger than I thought it was, actually. Because now that I'm looking at it, amazing what you can do with Google. There's actually a much larger thread of the use of the term crucible, or at least as it's translated in this version of it, in a number of different spots. So that's actually kind of cool. Someday I'm now going to have to go through and read through all the references.
And then on the point of the afterlife, I do not know where it originated. It is not in the Old Testament. The concept of one's upon passing, you go to heaven and you have your angel's wings, implying that a dead person can become an angel.
Where did that come from?
I don't know where it came from.
That is non-biblical entirely.
Yes, I know.
haven't
But that's
ever found anything.
yeah. But people talk about it. They talk
I
about all my
think the
angels.
only thing that you could possibly misunderstand that I've seen is when Jesus was talking to them about when you die, you actually are like an angel. You don't get married. Because there was that talk the Sadducees were having about
whose
wife
spouse?
she would be, in hell. I'm sorry, heaven, with the seven brothers that all died on earth.
Yeah.
That was like the insurance. Your first husband dies, you marry his brother.
Yeah.
Next.
Quite to the point, even if he had a wife. There is, but yeah, I do not know, but it's a cultural thing, particularly in the West, that you die and then you get to become an angel.
I've seen it in movies all the time, but when I read the Bible, I was like, where is it? I don't see it.
Well, and even when you go back, even in like Victorian literature, I mean, 100 years before television, it's there. I don't understand where it came from, but it was a very much the thing, and that they would look down on you, and they were either like rain was the angels' tears, or thunder was angels bowling, and you hear all these things. They sound ludicrous to us who go with scripture, but they're very much a part of reality. Well, it's a wonderful life. Every time a bell rings, an angel gets his wings.
Actually, here's a question for you. Do the angels, as described in the Bible, do they have wings?
No, but they fly. No, the seraphim.
Aren't those angels? Am I confused? I'm confused.
No, creatures from heaven is how they're described.
Okay.
And they are seraphim, and they have the four faces, and all the eyes, and the wings.
And depending on who you ask, those either are or are not angels. Because that's not...
Because when Abraham, before Isaac was born, 3 angels walk up to his tent, and he says, "My Lord, please come in." I'm pretty sure that they weren't seraphim. They wanted food and shade and were willing to talk with him. Pretty sure they weren't seraphim.
And you have to wonder because the difference between seraphim and angels very specifically were messenger of God. Yes, you raise your hand.
The Nephilim. The Nephilim were the offspring of the messengers of God and the daughters of men. I'm pretty sure that the daughters of men would not have been making time with multi-winged, multi-faced, multi-hoofed creatures.
That makes sense.
Just going off of the guess there. I mean, I'm just saying that I prefer a biped. I've always interpreted them as 2 separate creatures.
I thought they were different divisions.
And they might be, just like, we have dogs and cats. They're both 4-legged with paws and tails. One meows, one barks. So they still do the same thing in one's household. They are cute and decorative.
I can't read Hebrew, so I didn't know if there was any kind of clues.
There is, and actually, angel, by the way, is descended from a Greek word, not even a Hebrew word.
What is it in
Agelos, which means messenger. And wow, we could have a whole conversation on this, because depending on who you ask, yes, the seraphim and cherubim and all of those were angels. And then there's other people who say, no, they weren't. The angels were specifically messengers of God that were here on earth or in heaven. There's not really... there's not a whole lot to go on with that one. I mean, there's just so little. There's mentions of heaven here and there and what it's like to be there and etc. But we really...
I can't read the word.
But for Hebrew?
This is in Sodom, when the 2 angels came to Sodom. I don't know how to say the word, though.
Malak. M-A-L-stop-A-K.
It's in Hebrew. I don't know how to say the word.
Oh, no, I'm saying in Hebrew.
You said M, not mem.
You're right.
Mem, Lamed, Aleph, Kaf, Yod, Mem, Safed.
However, I'm going to, because we're already
Yes.
at...
Anyway, so there's a different word for seraphim versus an angel. So anyway, the whole concept that we die and then we go up and float around on wings and have a harp and float around in clouds is a complete cultural reference. There's no scriptural behind that. Anyway, which is my point. When we go to heaven, we are not angels. We still, and some people who I've personally have met, believe that whatever is wrong with the earthly body will be made right in heaven fairly immediately. Therefore, Grandpa who died with no legs can romp freely on bouncing from cloud to cloud. Not saying it's wrong, not saying it's right. I think we're all going to be surprised when we get there.
Well, and there actually is some biblical passages that, and one I'm gonna pick one though, which is I love this one because it becomes an entire word, an entire thought process comes from 1 Thessalonians 4. This is what happens when you're alive, and that whole like Enoch walks with God. There is an equivalent for humans, which is written in 1 Thessalonians, which is basically the whole. I've lost the word. Yeah, the ingathering, the drawing up, etc., etc. After that, we who are still alive and left will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so we will be with the Lord forever. And therefore, encourage each other with these words. Now, the interesting part is that it says with them, meaning those that are already gone before us, those that already died, had already been drawn up at that point. That passage right there. Well, let's see. That I can't think of the word suddenly.
Rapture?
Thank you. Rapture, word that never occurs in the Bible. That's the basis for rapture right there. But it implies that everybody's already there. Okay. I'm going to skip that one for the moment. Skip that one for the moment. Isaiah 57 is I said Isaiah 57 1 and 2. The righteous perish, and no one ponders it in his heart. Devout men are taken away, and no one understands that the righteous are taken away to be spared from evil. Those who walk uprightly enter into peace. Those that find rest as they lie in death. Okay, so you die, but it kind of doesn't really go on to what happens to you after that. There is some mention further in Isaiah, though.
And just to kind of sum up with the whole concept, particularly of Elijah, who was swept up with the chariots of fire and didn't die, so to speak. In the concept of the coming of the Messiah, they talk about that Moses and Elijah have to come back. They were looking for Elijah. They called John the Baptist Elijah because they knew that was the sign. When Elijah returned, it would be the coming of the Messiah. So it was this whole thing. And so right before his crucifixion, when they're up in the garden and Elijah and Moses show up, and they went to build dwellings, they don't want there to have to be the sacrificial lamb. They're looking for the Messiah to stay and help things be fixed. But they were looking for those signs. Unfortunately, it was only the few who saw Moses and Elijah, so the others chose not to believe. But and as a point, Moses, although we're told he died, he went up on the mountain, and Joshua left, and then Moses died. Somebody wrote this down in the book of Moses. Just going here.
Yeah, Moses didn't write at least that last part. I mean, come on.
Yeah, was it the last chapter of Deuteronomy? It cannot be by Moses.
Yeah. Well, I suppose it's theoretically possible that Moses is sitting up there going, "Yep, this is it."
And I died.
But that's not even the end of Deuteronomy. I mean, the last chapter, obviously, somebody else wrote.
Yeah.
And it's the concept of passing the power on to Joshua and all this other stuff. But a lot of different sects I have heard don't necessarily believe that Moses died. He might have gone, he was such a righteous man that he might have gone to heaven.
Yeah, the concept of living ascension.
Yeah.
Is heard of in the Bible in a couple of places, Enoch, etc., etc. the idea that some people just, hey, here I am, I'm in heaven, and they take their body with them and everything, which oddly is contradictory to some of the other thoughts, but also complementary, because there's some confusion in here.
And a lot of it, like when it says that Enoch walked with God, it does not say he died. That doesn't mean they just didn't find the body. They knew when. They give you a time that he walked on the earth for this many years, and then he walked with God. They know he was alive for this long, and then he was gone.
Yeah.
Maybe he just wanted to take a bus to San Francisco. I don't know. Especially since that phrase is used with Adam and Eve that are literally walking with God. He is incarnate and walking through the garden. So when it says that Enoch is walking with God, it kind of, I thought he said he wasn't going to come back then. So there's great mysteries to be had by all accounts.
Where did hell come from?
So what?
Where did hell come from?
Hell is actually a number of things. Go ahead.
In the New Testament and Gospels, and they credit it to being Jesus' words, I would make argument because they use Greek words. He talks about going down into death and Hades. Hades being obviously the Greek concept of underworld. But he talks about going down to death and Hades. If you cannot act right, and you're committing sins before your brothers, thus committing sins before God, you will be put down to death and Hades.
Hang on, I'm going to correct you. It wasn't if you didn't act right. You went down to Hades anyways. Hades was the underworld, and it had two divisions. During Jesus' time,
In
this
this
is very important.
scripture, it was that way.
And it's very important to understand that it is later described.
You're going to make me get out my Bible.
I've got it here somewhere because I think I actually wrote this down because I'm fascinated by it. Here we go. I even got this one down to, here we go. Jesus is described as having descended into Hades after his death, Acts 2:27 and 31, Ephesians 4:9. At the resurrection of Jesus Christ, it seems that the believers in Hades, i.e. the occupants of paradise, were moved to another location. Now paradise is above rather than below. 2 Corinthians 12:2-4. That is part of it. Now then, back up a little bit. New Testament equivalent to Sheol is Hades. Prior to Christ's resurrection, Luke 16:19-31 shows Hades to be divided into two realms: a place of comfort where Lazarus was, heaven, and a place of torment where the rich man was, hell. Lazarus's place of comfort is elsewhere called paradise, Luke 23:43. The rich man's place of torment is called Gehenna, is Mark 9:45. Between paradise and Gehenna, the two districts of Hades, there was a great gulf fixed, Luke 16:26. I cannot believe I actually had use for that. I had copied and pasted that thinking, if we go that direction with a discussion, at least I'll have that to fall back on. So,
Well, and I'm going to argue with you about word choice.
okay.
About word selection. In Buddhism, they call it heaven too. In Islam, they use the word paradise.
Well, that's why it's
Parentheses.
Right, but I'm just saying. I think there's a lot to be said with word choice and what we're actually talking about.
There's also the theory of two heavens.
And we're not, I'm just gonna stick with this party. And also, you were reading off stuff that mentioned Hades.
Yes.
Okay. Concept of Greek thought applied to Hebrew lifestyle.
I know.
There's trying to come up with a word. Who came up with decided to call a car a car? Why is it still not a carriage?
I understand.
So there's a lot to be said about word choice and translations of the Bible. And for those listening at home, read multiple translations for the love of God, please.
Especially also, you might want to consider, actually, if you get a chance, to read up a little bit on the concept of Hebrew thought versus Greek thought. Hebrew thought is Hebrews and I don't mean the book Hebrews, I mean Hebrews as in Old Testament, thought considerably different than the Greeks did. So when you're comparing and contrasting the works that are written in both sides, you do find out some very, very different things, some very different thought. Hebrew tends to be a circular thought pattern. Greek is a more literal, linear thought pattern, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, I
There's a
just
lot.
cannot imagine the Hebrew Messiah, who's this little Jewish man that's dirty and with busted feet because he never has any sandals, using the Greek word Hades. I just cannot fathom that in my mind.
All
I
right.
just I question everything. Do not ever think that any
Well,
thing
and
is the right answer.
the kicker is that Hades. Okay, this might be it. Close enough. Hades and Sheol actually are not incompatible concepts. It could actually be the same word or two different words for the same concept. There's nothing that's described for Sheol that says anything beyond there being two places. One of them the valley with the trash and the fire, and one of them just being where everybody goes and they die.
Right.
Hades is described as having a paradise and a place where where the wicked go. Not too dissimilar concepts. It really would boil down to what was used in the language at the time. It's impossible to tell.
And even just like when we talk about hell, man, my day at work was hell. Obviously, you're not being burned with having pineapple syrup, was it?
There's some
Okay.
Did you just use a pineapple?
Yes, I
Yes.
did, because that was the best.
Yes.
Please, all of you out there listening, watch Little Nicky and you'll get all of the jokes. Because that does use that uses Christian hell. That movie uses Christian hell, uses Greek hell. The concept of even the devil being an incarnate person, because the fall of Lucifer is not mentioned in Scripture. Don't tell the Catholics that, but it's not mentioned in Scripture. So the concept of there actually being bad angels isn't anywhere in Scripture. That's something that we have made up to make up the good and evil battle into something we can understand.
Well, and on top of that, Lucifer's never called Lucifer. Lucifer is the morning star. Was the angel that fell was the morning star.
But-
Lucifer is
but
the name that we
that's so
assigned to
much.
it because it was the Greek word.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
we're gonna wrap this up because
And
it is
Hosatan means the adversary, so that's not necessarily mean
you
either.
just have to get the last word in, don't you?
Yep.
That's all, folks. No, seriously, we'll be back not next week, but the week after. Right now, what we're doing is we're knocking off just a little early because we've got another group that's going to be coming in. But we have a big thing about accountability here. We do take donations. We do a observed countdown, but we're not going to do that on camera, which basically boils down to somebody in the group that's here has to watch the people that are part of the hierarchy, for lack of a better term, leadership, whatever. Me and my wife. Somebody else has to observe our countdown of what's in the donation box. And then we also take a vote once a month. And we take 10% of whatever's in donations, and we give that to whatever cause that we all kind of agree upon. So if you're watching this and you're thinking, hey, you need to give it to Goodwill or the United Way or whatever, you know what? You've got just as much to say about it as anybody else in the room. So if you want to have your say about that, just go ahead and post on Facebook or in those locations that I've mentioned: Facebook, Twitter, Google+, Google Hangout, email, website. What? Forskeet.com. Yeah. And say, hey, I vote for such and such. Anyways, but thank you very much for watching in, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. God bless.